anyways, entrepreneurship. But no, actually, can you guys talk a little bit more about how you kind of got started in your entrepreneurship journey and any advice you would give to someone who is trying to start out in entrepreneurship?
Don't do it. Yeah.
Huh?
Don't do it. Stay home.
No, don't say that.
It's terrifying, I think.
Yeah. It's just you.
Yeah. To a lonely road. Like advice, like here's do these things and you will succeed.
Actually, I think you're picking up on something. I can hear myself talking, which is okay. But I think the fear is actually a big part of it. And so, can you talk to us a little bit about how you dealt maybe with that fear and overcoming that in the process of entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So I think necessity. Once your goal becomes a necessity, you can't. You're either gonna make it work or you're not. You know what I mean? So I know a lot of designers and photographers and videographers and journalists who've all had a ton of different jobs, right? Like they've gotten money from restaurants and driving taxis or cleaning buildings or doing whatever, but they've always been a journalist, right? They've always been a photographer. They've always been. So until it becomes like you have a house note to pay behind the money you're gonna make on this ridiculous dream of yours, right? Like as soon as that starts to happen, like mentally for you, I think the fear goes away. The fear now is just I need to pay these bills or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's not like the entrepreneurial I hope I'm smart enough kind of fear. That part goes, I think, after, right? Like after the necessity becomes palpable. It's like you don't care anymore about like if you got it or not. It's like you just gotta go do something. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But I think as like a early entrepreneur here, that fear is definitely still there.
That's what I'm
it's
saying.
still the like, oh man, like I have this dream and I have this vision, and I think that for me, one thing that has reduced it the most significantly has been, interestingly enough, the support from my community. The feedback of like having people come to me because they want to be able to work with me and they see what I'm doing and want to support. So it's kind of this like validation through my community that's reducing it. But I don't know, man, I'm still waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning like, did I do all the things? Did I solve that problem? Am I doing this the best I can do to help most people?
Part, a lot of that doesn't go away, especially if you, like for me, I think the fear that you don't know it is something that, for me, it was realizing that nobody knows what they're doing anyway. Like, there is no, like very honestly, in the last 10 years that I've seen, culturally, there is no appeal to an authority anymore. Like, your opinion is as good as all of my experience, and even documented, like, I was tested and somebody else says I know what to do, but the question is always, well, who is that person who said you know what to do? And so for us in creative work, it comes down to, can you do the work or not? Like, I don't care what somebody said you know how to do. Like, you gotta be able to do it when we work, right? I don't know. I think the fear can be a motivational thing, but like, I don't think anybody should feel like they don't know what they're doing. Like, and it's hard to get. It was hard for me anyway to get over the hump of like the people closest in my circle always had positive things to say to me, right? Like my mom has always been like, "You're brilliant. Like everything you got it figured out. Like just go be successful, right?"
Yeah.
I'm just kind of an asshole deep down inside, so I can't trust positive feedback, especially from people I love and that I know love me. I'm like, you're just saying nice things, right? Mm-hmm. And so getting out of that sphere and then being validated by a larger community is definitely helpful. You know, people who don't like you, who can respect your work, I think is important.
Yeah. Absolutely. It kind of feels like, I know as I've been getting started, like I'm just this open book of like, okay, well, what do you think? And what is your opinion? What is your opinion? I kind of feel like we were talking about pivoting earlier. Like I feel like I'm playing basketball. I'm just like pivoting and pivoting and pivoting. It's like at some point you got to put the ball down, you got to go. And that is the moment when you realize like, oh, hey, I'm the entrepreneur. I'm the one making these choices and I've taken in all the accounts and all the information, but now I'm ready to go and put it down and move forward, and I get to be fully responsible with whatever happens after the ball's on the floor. You know what I mean? And I think for that, like that's that moment of just like, oh, this is what entrepreneurship is really like. And when you put the ball down and you see the opening and you take it all the way in the hole and you're like, oh, I did know what I was doing and I just needed to wait for a minute. I think that's maybe when that fear goes away of like not questioning, not looking around, but really having confidence in what you believe in it being might be a little bit different.
What I think it's good to get people in the room who disagree with you or who can, test your theory and hopefully y'all, you can find someone you have a mutual respect with that you can trust to be a harsh critic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, and not because I think it's impossible otherwise. Like you can't get better if you're not getting real feedback.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So.
Yeah, and I think entrepreneurship is, I feel like that word gets it gets twisted a little bit, and especially for younger folks, just like, what does it mean? Like, they hear, like, they think of Mark Zuckerberg sitting alone at the top, being this genius, winning and, starting their own thing at age 18 and dropping out of art. Like, that's not, like, in my mind, that's not what entrepreneurship is. Like, it's a mindset, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can be 15 years old in your first job with an entrepreneurial mindset, having an owner's mindset, and that's what's going to prepare you to be an entrepreneur in the future. Like, there's no one line to being an entrepreneur. Like, for me, like, I've sought out, like, okay, who do I want to work from and learn from? But I want to enter every relationship like wanting to be a partner. Like, I don't go like working for somebody and just saying, oh, I'm going to be an employee, I'm going to cash in. But like, if you go in thinking like I want to be an owner, like you end up being an owner.
Yeah.
Like, and that's and like and not everything is starting from scratch. Like I feel like almost when you start your new company, that should be like the last resort. Like you should have gone through every last track and said, okay, is somebody out there doing this better? Can I learn from them? Can I go work from them? And then it's like, oh wow, nobody's doing this.
Yeah.
Okay, so should I do that? Why is nobody else doing that? And then like, should I even be doing like if there's a true market gap? Then great, but like you should think long and hard before starting your own thing. But like approach like going, especially when you're younger. Like I'm 28 and I still think I'm young. Like I want to find those people who are in the community that are leaders that I respect, and I want to work for them, but I want to approach that as a partnership. Like I'm coming here to be your part, and then they elevate you into being a partner. They have that kind of model established in law firms well, and it's like you work, you learn, and you get ownership. You need to have an owner mindset from the very beginning.
Yep, and I think that comes from like showing up. Like you can't just approach the person and be like, yeah, I want to be an owner, but give me my paycheck every week and it's got to be this much. It's like, no, I'm going to show up and like I'm going to have the ability and the authenticity to be able to contribute. Like I have something to offer as an owner other than just wanting the handout of what ownership we think that looks like.
Well, that's what I think people misconstrue about the term or definition of entrepreneurship or ism or the entrepreneur as a person, right? Is they are someone who is an owner. And I mean, we joke in all forms of life, like, there are people who want to be designers more than they want to do design, right? Like they're interested more in like what it looks like on TV or something. Like my wife is an ICU nurse, so her job like actually matters, right? Like people's lives are on the line, you know what I mean? So I don't come home with any ego I have at work about like, oh, some younger designer wants to really, or I don't know what is even there anymore because it's been so trained out going home and being like, I had to reformat my computer, it's like today. And my wife's like, yeah, people died at my job. You know what I mean? It's like, so I think this expectation that like, there's a lifestyle that comes along with being an entrepreneur is not, it's a myth. You know what I mean? It's like, everyone is an entrepreneur. I think anyone in the working class, they're just not writing their own check. You know what I mean? It's like, where are you spending your money and how are you making it? I think matters. It should matter more to entrepreneurs than it does in a lot of cases, right? Because it's not the function of you starting a business. Or the reason of doing it should be because you want to do it, not because, well, I need to be an owner. You know what I mean? So it's like if the passion piece isn't there, and I agree 100% with what you're saying. Like you need to have the mindset of, Like I bounced around a ton of different agencies before I started my own because I never even considered starting my own. I thought I knew what I was doing, but I saw my career track, like, you know, associate designer, junior designer, art director, whatever, like rise through these ranks and then one day become a partner at some large studio, right? The further I got into that career, I was just like, this is stupid. Like, I don't like most of how this works, right? Freelancing, I think, and bouncing around different agencies, I was able to pick up on what works and what doesn't. But that fear is always there of like, well, if they've been doing it this long, obviously they're smarter. Obviously they know something I don't, right? So I'd go get that job there and find out, like, do they actually know, or is it just done like that because somebody told them to do it, right? Like, so I think my advice to an entrepreneur would be definitely check, you know, measure twice before you go out on your own, but expect and plan to be awesome at whatever it is you're doing, because if you're not, there's no reason to go out on your own. Like, if you can't do it better than everybody else, if you don't believe that, what are you, like, why would you do that?
And just like make sure you discover a real need.
Yeah.
Like don't start your own business like as a monument to yourself, right, or to what you think you should be. Like really discover a need, and then if it's not being filled, that's a great sign to then go do it. But if you don't have that conviction and you don't have that experience to know, you know, why is that wrong, or what is that inefficiency, or why is that mispriced, or what, you know, why doesn't that happen in the world?
So tell us a little bit more about this shift and how this shift sort of changed your perspective on San Antonio and kind of the narrative. How that has changed in San Antonio, do you think?
I can definitely only speak from a really personal perspective, but I think every time that I left, it was because I felt like I kind of outgrew the space. I was like, okay, I'm no longer challenged, I'm no longer engaging with my community, and so I've got to go somewhere else in order to like learn that thing or have that experience. And then I think this last time when I came back, you know, all of those foundations and those friendships and relationships, everything had expanded. And so then all of a sudden the network and the community had significantly grown in a direction that I was like, oh man, people are doing things now. They have an impact on our community, on our culture, whether it be, you know, food or business or in education, to where I was like, oh man, there's something here that I can be a part of and I can grow alongside with, you know, these new ties with some amazing organizations like Launch SA and Breakfast Launch and then Geekdom now, where I feel supported not only by, you know, my friends and my network, but also then by this like greater community who just wants to see people be successful, the community be successful and to grow. And I think that for me was that really big shift of like, oh man, not only am I connecting with people here, but I'm connecting with the community, and we're all working towards the same thing of trying to make this place better. Like we've all boomeranged, we all went and came and gone, like, and I want to stay, so what do we need to do to make it cool to stay and to grow it here? So I think that has been the biggest shift for me, is the support and the desire to help it grow with everyone else that's also willing to make it grow.
That's amazing. Do you guys want to comment on sort of the expansiveness and how you've seen that change as well in the city and in your work and your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really identify with that. I think so much of it for me was just perspective. So, you know, growing up here, you know, I grew up on the north side, kind of far removed from everything that was happening downtown, and it just felt like there was nothing for me here. You know, it was just a very warm place to grow up. There's a lot, I mean, you know, we always have that narrative of being this, you know, family city with great cost of living, and, you know, yeah, and that was great, but when I was getting into my, you know, late teens, early 20s, I need to go somewhere where I'm going to be stretched and growing, and that's just, I did not see that here. So I went to Austin, I went to UT for school, was there for 5 years, and, you know, that was what I thought, you know, I needed. And then I went to New York, you know, again, looking to grow, looking to expand. But, you know, once I think got a little bit older and got a little bit farther from the city, then my perspective shifted, and kind of how I looked at the city was different. And I all of a sudden I started to see more of a place for me here. And so I think it was still the same city, but it was just my perspective. And I think a lot of kids that grow up here do think of this as like if you don't get out, it's some kind of failure, like you didn't try to get, which I don't think is the right. I don't think that's a fair thing, I think other cities, Boston, New York, like you can stay there and have the whole opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity for you to grow, but for some reason we have this narrative of the kids who grew up here, and it's like they don't see this as a place for them to grow in. And I think that we need to change that narrative and that perspective to retain some of this talent. We've got 1.5 million people with a ton of talent.
When we were teenagers, there wasn't. Things were just not as connected as they are now. Like you can experience quite a bit just at on a computer talking to different people. So I think that the connectivity helps a lot, but I don't know. Like I think there's something romantic in the people who have never left. Like especially the people who never wanted to. Like because they've already seen what San Antonio has to offer, or at the very least their appetites are more manageable for their what they have access to, I guess. Does that make sense? Like so I think there's a ton of people who aren't necessarily even interested in leaving because they already feel like they have everything they need, right? Like if you work in communication or media or tech or things that San Antonio, I guess, off the record is not really known for, right? Like art to a large degree, right? Like we know ourselves for art quite a bit, but the outward, other markets do not look at San Antonio like, historically have not been like, there's more new artists coming out of San Antonio, right? Like that's not breaking news, right? So I think there's a ton to be gained by leaving and coming back, but it depends, to your point, kind of what you're actually retaining from that place, right? Like, and what your goal is in coming back. Because if it's, I just want more stuff, right? Like a big city has more of everything. There's more good stuff, but there's also more bad stuff, right? Like there's more noise, there's more, all of it. So I think curating that stuff, for what you've experienced somewhere else and want to import or kind of bring back, I think that part matters quite a bit too, right? Like importing the right things and bringing back the right perspective versus the wrong one. Yeah. I think time and perspective has a lot to do with it, right? Like, and just the changing demographic of San Antonio, like the people we grew up with that were the cool kids are now the cool adults, and they're matriculating to places of like authority and power and business or whatever, so they can steer things better if they're in those positions, right? Like make cool stuff happen. So
yeah, and like one concept with that brand that we just keep kind of coming back to and working around is that this is a city where you can really be a contributor, not just a consumer. And so, most cities that kind of are the hot cities where, you're Dallas, New York, San Francisco, San Diego, like these are places where, you plug and play. You want to live your hot millennial lifestyle, go to brunch, have everything at your fingertips. Yeah, but you're a consumer, like you're living a consumer lifestyle. And I think a lot of folks, especially after COVID, before COVID, people just had a year of soul searching and they're thinking like, what am I doing with my life? Where do I fit in? What's my community? How do I contribute and have a meaningful life? And like, I think that's what San Antonio most has to offer, where like, you can really show up and be a contributor here. Where, they're looking for young leaders, handing out like board roles. They're like, okay, but who wants to be in a leadership role? And like,
ERCOT. I'm trying to get on there.
ERCOT. Somebody talk to them. But that's a unique thing. That's a unique thing for us. Like our community. Like if you want to be engaged, you want to be a stakeholder. Like there's room for you here.
I agree with that 100%. Like, and that's been my experience starting a company in San Antonio, talking to new companies, like founders and people coming back. Is like the hierarchy here seems a lot flatter than other cities, and certainly flatter than it's ever been in San Antonio. Like it is a lot easier to get into kind of, there are gatekeepers and layers upon layers in all respects, right? But it's just easier in San Antonio right now for whatever the perfect storm of opportunity and talent and all that. Like that's why I like San Antonio, especially for work. Like because it's a DIY like come and make the thing, right? Like
Yeah, that's authentically supported too. Like that was when you were saying that, like started glowing, because like that's why I'm here. Like that's why I say is like no matter what, whatever place or whatever segment or industry I kind of like poke my hand into, there's someone there that's saying like, oh, you want to come and do this? Take this class, do this thing. Here's this opportunity for you, this mentorship. And it's not from a place of what that person might be able to gain, but it's authentic. Like if you're interested, let's grow this thing together. It's that authentic support that I think, you know, I want to contribute to a certain degree to like the culture. Like we're truly a bi-cultural city, and so in within that, the embracing of each other and these other cultures, we're also embracing new ideas and new concepts, and that we want to grow this thing together. But everyone's opinion and everyone's effort is valuable.
And that like community, that togetherness, like
Yeah.
another kind of interesting dichotomy, like, you know, influencing is the thing right now. Like,
Yeah.
everybody wants to be an influence, but like that's very self-centered. It comes off very self-oriented.
Right.
But I think like San Antonio has this idea of confluence, like Confluence Park,
Yeah.
you have the river. And so it's like, can we be confluencers? Like, what does that mean? Like working
Yeah.
together, not look at me, but like we. And like, what are we doing together? And I think that, don't be an influencer. Like, what about confluence?
Yeah.
And like, there's a lot there, and that's the mentality of the city. Like, we're not as showy, you know. Like, we're not Dallas, where it's big jewelry, big hair, big. Like, there's money here, but you wouldn't know it looking around, because it's a much more kind of community oriented, not as individualistic, which I think is a positive thing.
Absolutely.
You know, like our society has gone so individualistic, which, you know, is good. People need to express, but also you get isolated and you're lonely. And
it fails to be a society, right? If everyone is out for themselves to such a degree that they're injuring their neighbors, right? And so that I think all of that is true about San Antonio. When I left here, I felt very much like there's stuff to do and there are people who I connect with, but there's no accelerant to the whole. It's like we can keep toiling, and you know what I mean? So when I left, I didn't leave to go do goals somewhere else. Like it was kind of a different situation. Like I got asked to move to Carbondale, and I was like, okay, like I didn't want to be here anymore. So it was perfect timing for me, but I had no plan to ever come back, because it felt like people were at such odds, especially in the art community. If your neighbor got some kind of shine, it was like, why are they, you know what I mean? And it was like, this is for the whole street though, right? Like if the neighbor does and this neighbor does and you're still left out, the street had, you know, like a rising tide raises all boats kind of thing. And it was lost on a lot of people, because I think unfortunately the prevalent culture, like our prevalent culture, rewards and we promote people who tend to be more self-centered and people who tend to be more, I'm trying to do for me, and you know what I mean? Like we recruit these people and we tell them like, yeah, you're doing great, like because you're hitting these metrics or whatever it is. But there's all this damage around them, you know what I mean? And there's no real community. And I think what's special about San Antonio now is that's what I'm saying. I couldn't tell you why it's happened. I think there's been some critical mass that got hit, where people all just kind of had some kind of awakening or whatever, you know what I mean? And just started being better to each other. Yeah. But it feels like people are working together a lot more and a lot better, you know?
But it's hard. I think us, you know, being from here, having some roots here, like, you know, San Antonio is such a good place to plug back into. Yeah. But it's hard to move here, you know. I get that, where like, you know, if you move here from another city, you're living up on, you know, 281, and you're like, so what do people do here? Right? Yeah. You know, like, and so like, I think we need to do a better job of like, how do you make it easier for people to plug in? You know, that's the good thing with Austin. Like, you don't have to know anybody, you don't need to know any direction. You just show up, you're on 6th Street, you're like, okay, stuff is happening. Yeah. But we don't have that like instant plug-in for folks that aren't from here.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that you kind of mentioned briefly, which is this idea of like metrics of success and sort of the way people are valuing work and how that's sort of changing. And so as an entrepreneur who is purpose-driven and is community-driven, how have you found sort of striking that balance, or the challenge of overcoming having to balance like the purpose-driven versus like having a business? You know, how are you finding that balance?
It's a wonderful question and something that I've struggled with a lot. And I think that the realization that impact is the most valuable thing that you can have, and that having the ability to maintain and discover like your true core values, and for mine it just happened to be very community centric and having the biggest impact that I can have on children's education and getting them outdoors, and those are the values that I hold to be important, and recognizing that the biggest impact I can have is by finding a way to be supported and have a financial gain involved, where in making that money, the money doesn't have to be about me having a nicer car or my employees and people having like living these lavish lifestyles, but rather that goes back into the business and the ability to be able to do more work that has a positive impact through the nonprofit work, through, you know, we're able to donate and work with SAISD because we've been able to generate this income from the private sector, and we flush it over to be able to help feed the public sector without having to rely on grant funding and things like that. I don't know if that clearly answered your question, but that's been my like, how do I make this work? How do I not feel? How is it okay to have a profitable, you know, organization and business in order to be able to drive impact versus simply for the sake of having more money? You know?
Actually, I wanna dig a little bit deeper into this idea of mindset and the importance that has, especially right now, especially as everything that's going on in the world. And just kind of being kind to yourself in that process, and sort of what we can all do to be kinder to each other in the process of growing and learning, and how you guys have maybe had that through mentorship, or what has been your experience with that.
I think humility has been the biggest propellant in continuing to move forward. I don't know everything, and as soon as I think that I do, I think is when I will stagnate and end up off floating around on my own. So I applied to Geekdom Community Fund and I lost, and I was heartbroken. But then I went back and watched all of the judges' feedback, and I was like, oh, like they brought up some super valid like weaknesses in my business model, my business plan, and I was like, man, one, I wish we could have this conversation so I could ask you more questions. But two, of like, okay, well, let's take a couple steps back. I don't know everything. I thought this business model was set, but like it's not. So let's take some things backwards and redo it. And again, it's not the like, every word that they said is totally valid and this is the direction to go, but it's just acquiring that information and taking it all in, and then looking at the big picture and like knowing what's important to me and the value system, how I can now take this new information and move forward in a way that will hopefully be more sustainable. And recognizing that most people, I think, are there to help you, especially here. They're here to help you. So long as I can be open to what other people think and be able to still, you know, constructively move through those things and make the best decisions. I think, humility.
Yeah, and to that point, you know, that old proverb, you know, you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think part of that going together is not getting your way every time. It's compromise, it's feedback, and you have to be able to take that constructive criticism and believe that people are there in your corner, or you're gonna burn bridges, you're gonna close yourself off, and you're gonna miss good opportunities because you're too caught up in your own whatever. And I mean, I think a lot of folks are. I mean, we've all gone through a collective traumatic experience, you know, and I think everybody's handling that very differently. But a lot of folks are caught up in their own stuff right now, and like just don't let that, like, don't get in your own way. Like, I think that's what I'm most kind of worried about. Like, I mean, we're doing it. We've done it the last year with politics and everything else. Like, we're just don't get in your own way, and like let's try and, you know, assume the best in others until they prove you wrong. Assume that, you know, that even like with entrepreneurs that are trying to raise money, you know, they'll be like, we'll meet and hear their business plan. It's like, well, and like they'll get offended with their ideas. Like, well, you're asking us for money. Like, what do you mean? Like, and so it's like, it's not about you. It's like, I just think differently. And if you are, you know, if you're like, if you want to fund this completely yourself, you do it exactly how you want. But if you're looking to bring in others, bring in partners, Like you're gonna have to think, and they might actually help you. Like
Yeah.
you know, like they might have something good to say. So I think just everybody's defense mechanisms, like we're all very vulnerable. Everybody's defense mechanisms, you know, they come up, they fight, and that's to protect yourself. But a lot of times that hurts yourself. And just being conscious of those defense mechanisms, and you know, using them when they're necessary, but being able to put those aside to take that constructive criticism, really helpful.
I agree. Well stated. I think I don't know. For me, I would the biggest benefit that I don't know. I think just don't be an asshole to people. You know, like if somebody needs help, help them. If you need help, ask. If help is not there, then that sucks. But you know, keep trucking. Like there's more people. I think, especially in the creative world, and then an entrepreneur has to be at least 1 foot in the creative world. Whatever their other business is, you still gotta know people. And what we do is like so laser focused on empathy, right? Like the entrepreneur has to be there already, or your model is never gonna work because you don't understand, if you don't understand your market, right? Like people, who are you selling to, right? Like robots are not buying stuff yet.
Not yet.
Yet.
Yeah.
That's awesome. No, you guys touched on a lot of things that I think relate to the fact that usually if we feel like we're falling down, we're focusing too much on ourselves and not enough on the big picture and what's going on around us.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for contributing to this conversation and for blowing our minds a little bit about the reality of work and life. So that's awesome.
Thanks for having
You
me.
did a great job, Cindy.
Yeah.
Great job.
As a bystander, I'd like to thank you for having me. Honestly, as an entrepreneur, as a small business owner myself, hearing each of your thoughts, I can totally relate, you know? And like the fear that you're going through, I went through that almost 2 years ago when
Yeah.
the first company I started, you know, and then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And then my company went to complete zero income. And then I was like, oh my God, everything I worked hard for, everything I put in one basket, now it's gone, what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
But truck through and keep going, you know? San Antonio's awesome.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great people that want to help you. And when we first met, we need more female entrepreneurs, you know? So, great conversation.
Yeah. That was cool. That was fun.
It was nice. It was a good time. Are you getting in here?
I really just wanted to let them have the conversation. That's why I was like, it's not really a panel. It's more about what are they thoughts?
Yeah, I just shot him a text, but
So.
I'm still breathing down.
Awesome.
We could set up